And I am absolutely delighted to have a chance for the next 50 minutes to listen to Paul Romer, Professor Romer, who is an extraordinary man because he has just won the highest honor possible in economics, the Nobel Prize for Economics, by essentially saying that economics and economists have been getting it wrong. He has come out and criticized the economic profession and tried to present a vision of economics which is quite different in terms of how it looks at non-economic factors such as ideas and innovation. Very important set of ideas, not least because it has big implications for how we look at climate change and the tech sector, which of course have been two themes that have been dominating this week. But he hasn't just been challenging economics and economists and what they've been saying, he's also been challenging the way that economics conducts itself. One of the things I love about Paul Romer is that when he was at the World Bank as chief economist, between stints in his academic career, he issued memos to his staff telling them that they were absolutely hopeless at communication. He criticized them for mathiness. And in a famous memo, he actually said that they were not allowed to include more than 2.6% volume of ands in their writing. And that outspokenness caused such trauma for the World Bank economists that it actually contributed to him eventually being kicked out?
Getting myself fired.
Getting yourself fired. Exactly. So he's somebody who's not just tried to rethink the concept of economics, but also how economics is done. Incredibly important. So what we're going to do is he's going to give us a 10-15 minute précis of the ideas that won him the Nobel Prize. And then I'm going to ask him a few questions, like, how did winning the Nobel Prize change your life? Why on earth did you decide to get married the same day? Right. And what was it about that 2.6% ratio that made you so upset? And then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So, Professor Romer,
good.
The floor is yours.
So, just to keep the energy level up, I'll stand. So in keeping with the introduction, what I want to tell you about is the sense in which I was wrong. This isn't just economists, but I made a mistake in my career. I didn't see the degree to which economists were making claims that were about the advantages of the market, the disadvantages of non-market mechanisms, claims that were just not true. And it wasn't just that I worked on something else, how it is that ideas fit into the model and lead to growth, but that work I did on ideas, for which I received the Nobel Prize, lent some cover to this misleading message about the power of the market. So I need to explain how I feel about this. I think the thing that would truly be shameful from my perspective is if somebody could say of me what Richard Feynman said about string theorists in physics, which was, they don't make predictions, they make excuses. And I'm not going to make excuses. And what that means, though, is that you have to stick to this idea that a fact beats a theory every time. We've got our lovely theories. I'll tell you the one that I think is wrong. But if the facts say the theory is wrong, it's wrong. No excuses. So I don't mind admitting that I was wrong in the sense of missing something that was more important and challenging it sooner. But I would never live with myself if I was complicit in accepting assertions that were not true, and even being quiet and complicit in that sense. So let me try and first say something about the work I did, although I won't spend a lot of time on this. The gist of it was that the market and the pursuit of profit by for-profit firms is a very important part of the finalization, the instantiation of ideas and turning them into goods and services that generate more value for everyone. So the market was very beneficial in this role. And the measure of benefit here is it generates output, or growth in output, generates growth. Growth here is measured as change in GDP per capita. And I'm going to emphasize this point about, let's talk about how we would measure it and test if the prediction is right. Now, I think there was some real value in this work. It formalized things that we knew. I think it highlighted some things we didn't know before, especially about the degree to which an economy based on ideas turns other people into allies instead of rivals. If it's all about pounds of copper, having more people means fewer pounds of copper per person. There's just no way around that. But if it's about getting more value out of resources with new ideas, more people will mean more ideas that everybody can use. So this point about ideas is really profoundly optimistic, because we can keep getting more value out of limited resources. And it's not just that we can have more, but it's we can be better people once we understand the degree to which those others are actually our allies, not our enemies. But this kind of reflection on what I missed is generated by this kind of process of reflecting on that message and trying to understand why is it that we're not, in fact, making progress. So now, how would I measure progress? When I've looked at growth over time and pointed to progress that nations make and compared nations in terms of progress, one of the measures I use is not just GDP growth, but life expectancy. On average, how long do people live? This is something which has increased dramatically over time because of discovery of more ideas about health and about pharmaceuticals. So if we take just the measure of, on average, how long do people live as our indicator, our proxy indicator for progress, the simple fact is the United States has stopped making progress. Life expectancy has been falling for the last three years. And you'll know what will happen when somebody talks about this. Everybody will say, oh, no, that wasn't the proxy metric we were going to use for progress. We have this other thing. It doesn't matter if on average people are dying younger. No, it matters. It's a fact, and we gotta come to terms with this. There were signs already that the market was not generating an outcome that we might judge as progress. The steady increase in inequality was paralleling the increase in average output, but there was lots of, kind of ex post adjusting the measuring stick to try and explain that away. That was the making excuses about the market. And moreover, this is not the first time we've seen a case where more innovation, more discovery, more output, like GDP, was accompanied by a regress, a fall in life expectancy. The most obvious instance of this in the past was when people first moved into cities. Cities and science, I don't know how to rank them, but cities and science were the two greatest inventions of humans. Urban settlement, permanent settlements, unleashed this whole process of learning from each other, specializing, trading with each other, that just transformed what it means to be a human on Earth. But when we moved into cities, life expectancy fell. Now, how did we solve that? First, we had science that just gave us the facts. People were dying of infectious diseases. And then we took those facts and we relied on a set of norms that were rich enough to guide our decisions. Norms that go beyond just freedom, which I'll come back to in a minute, but a much richer set of norms. And acting on those norms, we just said, it's not okay to defecate out in the open. It's not okay to run sewage out into the street. It's not okay to go out if you're infecting people with typhoid. You can be confined to your house. And no, you can't skip getting vaccinations for your children just because you want to. There's a way to encapsulate these norms that I learned that they use in the Navy, the U.S. Navy, which is to think about ship, shipmates, self, in that order. We have to prioritize protecting the ship. And then we can think about our shipmates, and then finally we can think about ourselves. And under those norms, there are some restrictions on individual freedom, because we need those to protect the ship. And the deep mistake, I think, in economics was to overstate and claim too much about the benefits that come from an emphasis just on self. Self, 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 that's all you need. That's the way to protect the ship. We have a theory that predicts that, but the theory just doesn't fit the facts. And let's be clear, those norms about what's the right thing to do have to be backstopped by a government. We're always at risk of misbehavior, even by sociopaths. Every population has them. If they fail to conform to the norms, you can very easily get this process of unraveling, where imitation conformism leads to a few norm violators to ultimately change the norm in the society as a whole. So we've got to be willing to use the government as our tool to protect those norms, to protect the ship. Now go back to this story about discovery. Think about a 2x2 table where on the horizontal axis I'm measuring, is this profitable? Yes, no. This new possibility. On the vertical axis, think, is this beneficial on average? Yes, no. Now, the story from my work was that the market can deliver the things that are profitable and beneficial. And the market won't deliver the things that are not profitable and not beneficial. So far, so good. We always knew that there were some things that were beneficial that were not profitable, so the market wouldn't deliver them. And so we had mechanisms like support from science, from support by the government for science. It's given away for free as a way to help address that box. The one we didn't pay enough attention to are things that are profitable but harmful. And this is the point that I just missed. And it's not hard to think about cases like this. You remember that slogan, better living through chemistry? Well, for a lot of chemicals, it's actually true. But DDT, not so much. It's killing the birds. Lead in gasoline, it's poisoning our children. Chlorofluorocarbons, it's destroying the ozone layer that protects us from ultraviolet light. We needed to have a government and a set of norms that said it doesn't matter if you're making a profit on lead in gasoline or producing chlorofluorocarbons. You've got to stop because you're damaging the ship. You're undermining the possibilities for everybody. Now, why did I ignore this box? Economists have this theory about the market being based on mutually beneficial exchange. If every trade in a market makes each person better off, you just follow all the trades, you add everything up, and the effect has to be a benefit, at least no change or maybe positive benefit for everybody. It's a great theory. It's beautiful. As a philosophy, it sounds wonderful. And this implies that there's nothing in that box of profitable in the market but harmful. But the facts just show otherwise. And we can make excuses. Yeah, okay, DDT, we didn't mean that. Lead in gasoline, yeah, we didn't mean that. But at some point, it's like, and the we didn't mean that is, well, that's not really what our theory said. Yeah, it actually was what your theory said. And at some point, you got to say, hey, actually, the theory is wrong. So, by the way, to be more pointed, what about Oxycontin? Brand new, innovative, killing people. That's one of the big factors right now in falling life expectancy. Why didn't we say that's causing harm? You can't do it. Now, I think there was actually looking back at how we got to this point. I think there's a real corruption of economics by a group at my home institution, the University of Chicago. And the most harmful thing they did was justify, support, normalize the idea that we can ignore disconfirming facts. Our theories are more important than the facts. We no longer buy the idea that a fact beats a theory every time. And they did this not because of a belief that this was the right way to do science, because you say it in open, it's just obviously crazy way to think about science. They did this because they had an ideological commitment to the idea of hobbling, shrinking, limiting the power of government, because their view was that individual freedom was more important than anything else. And they were, starting in the mid-20th century, they were worried about, fascism becoming a force in the United States. And so, they may have had reason to be worried. But, we should never have tolerated a kind of a perversion of economics as a science and letting others turn it into this pseudoscience that was pushing an ideological program. So what's happened since then is that we've dismantled many non-market solutions we had, and we've hobbled the powers of government that could stop things that were harmful. In terms of non-market solutions, think about the Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations as nonprofits that were actually very good at providing insurance in an earlier era. Those are all gone. They've all been turned into for-profit corporations, and it's a huge loss. There's an attack underway right now that a nonprofit university is not the right way to go. We really got to go with for-profit universities, and we'll see how that turns out. People from Chicago very consciously through this offshoot, the Federalist Society, have tried to neuter antitrust law as any kind of a check on what firms can do. We can come back and talk about this if people want. I was part of the case by the Department of Justice against Microsoft. And in principle, I have no problem with antitrust enforcement, but we got to be realistic that the odds that any antitrust action is actually going to survive appeal to the appeals courts and the Supreme Court are very low. I mean, like 1 in 10 at best. Very clear that the appeals courts are just completely captured by this ideology of the Federalist Society and just, the market's good, don't let the government interfere. We underinvested in things like open source software compared to proprietary software. I was very dismissive of Wikipedia in the beginning, but it as an organization has made the world, it's really making progress towards making all of the world's knowledge available to everyone in the world for free. So I personally just underestimated the power of that kind of volunteer-based organization. And we've underestimated the potential for a public option as a way to provide certain kind of services relative to the market. I'll just give you an example. I was surprised when I learned in China that the People's Bank of China runs the credit bureau. And I've never forgotten that. And now I desperately wish that I could say, I want the Fed to be my credit bureau. I don't want those idiots at Experian or any of those other credit bureaus to have any of my knowledge, any of my information. I want it to be illegal for them to collect information about me and to be selling it with everybody else. So there's many instances like that where people ought to have a choice to disconnect from a market equilibrium and market behavior that they don't trust, that they think is bad. So it isn't just market option for healthcare. It could be market option for a lot of things, especially related to data and privacy. So let me just conclude by saying that I don't think it's a good use of my energy, or I'll leave others to make their own decision, but it's not a good use of my energy to attack like the Sackler family for introducing Oxycontin, to attack the current leadership at Boeing or the board at Boeing for the kind of the dishonesty of their actions and the harm they did by undercutting and really gutting the effectiveness of the FAA as a regulatory body. This, I think, is actually going to destroy Boeing as a company. It isn't even going to work out well for Boeing. Remains to be seen. I think they're in much deeper trouble than most people realize. But, I don't think it's a good idea to just, demonize those individuals. I don't think it's a good idea to demonize people in the tech industry, including Mark Zuckerberg. But let's be clear about what the equilibrium is here. I've asked everybody I could, and I'll ask you too. You can, in the question and answer period, you can tell me what you think. Could Mark Zuckerberg personally determine the outcome of the upcoming presidential election? Some people have said, I haven't thought about that. Some said, I don't know. A lot of people said yes, the ones who know Facebook well, know how they're managing political campaigns. Nobody said no. And so the question is not would he or what type of a person is he, but we should just never have allowed that kind of power in the hands of one person. Be clear, this is not just in the United States. It's its goal is to be the platform for political advertising, political discourse for every nation in the world that runs elections. And they're on course. So this country was founded on the belief that unchecked power was dangerous. It was dangerous to the things we value. And the things we value were not just liberty. It included the pursuit of happiness and life. And economists have fallen down on the job. The thing I will do, instead of demonize people who just pursue profit, I want to just take a very hard look at the behavior of economists, the deviation from science, the inattention to the facts, and go back to doing our job as scientists. And if we do that right, I predict that we will help protect us all from unchecked power and preserve the pursuit of life, liberty, and preserve liberty, the pursuit of happiness, so life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thanks.
Well, as someone who has a PhD in cultural anthropology, which is a social science that economists used to think was somewhere around pond life in the academic sphere, I find this fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure, just looking at the audience, that many of you are intrigued by these ideas. But they are pretty subversive for where the economics profession has been for the last few decades. I say, you got kicked out of the World Bank. I'm sure plenty of economists would like to have kicked you out of some economic departments.
Right now, what I tell people is, you just got to take a number and get in line.
Okay.
If you want to talk.
I'm curious, I mean, having won the Nobel Prize for economics, has that changed how people treat you?
Well, I'll tell you the story that illustrates the change. I was asked to write a commentary for The Lancet about an article that had been put together about human capital. And so I wrote my first draft, sent it in, and as is my tendency, I kind of overshot, tried to be too ambitious. The editors wrote back and said, Paul, this is just going to connect with our readers. Can you try again? So I said, okay. I wrote another version. I thought I was doing a good job of making it understandable. You can tell me afterwards or anonymously if my lecture here was understandable. But in the second draft, the editors wrote back and said, hey, Paul, it's just we're just not going to get there. So thanks for trying, but we're not going to publish your op-ed. The next week, I got the Nobel Prize. And then the auditors wrote me and said, that second version, that was really pretty good. Could we publish that? So I thought, this is a really bad sign. I got to get people, I got to make sure that I'm around somebody who will tell me when I'm wrong, somebody who will tell me when it's confusing and not clear, because otherwise I'm doomed. And this is really the heart of science, is open disagreement. And my fear is people are just going to say, oh, Paul, you're great.
Well, so I'm going to turn to questions in a moment. People can say in the audience if they don't think he's great, or some version of that.
Yeah, please.
Before I do that, though, I just want to quickly pick up on a couple of themes, because essentially what you argue in your lecture is that, point one, there's more to economies than just money or people. It's also about ideas. Yeah. Point two is that actually the beauty of ideas is it is not the type of resource that you compete over. Instead of being a zero-sum game, there's actually a lot of ideas, and when there's one idea and another idea, they can actually create more ideas, which is very powerful, because of course most of the time economists think about economies as having finite resources, and it's basically competition for resources. For ideas, it's not. Thirdly, you're saying that actually the beauty of ideas is that you can unleash progress, which can transform how we live. But fourthly, we can't do that just by relying on the market. Is that a fair précis?
Absolutely.
Okay. I was awake, I was listening. Good. So what does that mean for climate change?
This reminds me of Greenspan's remark. If you think you understood what I said, I must have misspoken. Good.
Well, there weren't even any.
You understood. Well,
there weren't even any ands in there.
Okay.
What does that mean for climate change, though? Because there's been a lot of extremely apocalyptic, very depressing presentations and discussions this week.
Yeah. Well, these two parts of the message cut in different ways. I went back and looked carefully at the story of the fight against the chlorofluorocarbons and the fight to protect the ozone layer. There were a lot of almost apocalyptic predictions at that time that we couldn't survive without those chemicals.
And that was when? That was
well,
3
the
decades ago?
action was taken under the Reagan administration.
Yeah.
So George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State, in the United States, we banned the chlorofluorocarbons, and then we negotiated a treaty worldwide that led all countries to ban the chlorofluorocarbons. And there's a little bit of ongoing work about enforcement. If you've been tracking this, there have been some places that have not been enforcing that ban, but we'll get that right. So it was only in the time of the Reagan administration where we had no trouble saying that we got to protect the ship. We can't destroy the layer that protects us from dangerous ultraviolet radiation. And it doesn't matter if firms are making profit selling these chemicals. We're going to stop it in the United States, and then we're going to get other countries to go along. And it wasn't that hard to solve. And in fact, it wasn't that hard to come up with substitute chemicals either. And this is the message about ideas, that once you're facing a ban or you're facing, say, a very high tax, people are incredibly clever at inventing around that, coming to some other solution. So I don't think it will be that difficult to address the problems, to sharply decarbonize our energy system, if we just create incentives for people to figure out how to do it. You think about, like, we've had enormous success in figuring out how to extract more fossil fuel out of the ground with fracking and all of the kind of supporting innovations in that space, which, by the way, government research played an important part in facilitating, but which the market then perfected. If we could just take all of that energy and innovation and cleverness and direct it at something that would actually be beneficial. I mean, this is a clear example of something which is harmful on net. We don't want to have more hydrocarbons that we can burn because, you know, if we burn them all, we're going to just fry the planet. So that's innovation, which was profitable, but which is harming the planet. If we just steered the innovation towards things that are actually beneficial, it won't be that hard to solve. So I think, one, we shouldn't be so pessimistic about solving that problem. But two, we really have to take seriously this notion that it can be profitable and harmful, and we need to have a way to just shut those things down.
Right. I'm going to turn to the audience for questions in just a moment, but before I do, what about the tech sector? Because, you know, everyone can see that actually if you could only get a combination of government incentives and government action and funding for research, then you could actually start getting real incentives to try and create solutions for decarbonisation. But something like the harmful role of social media isn't an area where there's such an obvious technological solution, or is there? I mean, I was in Cannes recently and last week, and people were talking about, you know, is it possible to get funding for privacy-preserving tech innovations?
Well, first, just take seriously this idea that we could have a credit bureau at the Fed or the Bank of England, and that also then each individual could say, I want it to be illegal for anybody to collect that kind of information from the private sector. I just want to do it at the Fed. We could easily do that. It's this mindset about the market is the right solution that's just holding us back from, you know, anticipating those possible solutions. But it has to be accompanied by just some realism about the fact that if you're going to build like a tech solution in the government, you're going to have to pay salaries that are competitive with the tech sector. And we could do that if we just set our minds to it. I have a test question I ask everybody. What's the highest salary you can reach as a civil servant in Singapore? Any guesses? It's $1 million US as base, roughly. It's probably higher. It's probably gone up over time, but about $1 million US per year as base. But there's also bonus that can actually more than double that salary. So if we paid people salaries like that, we could attract very talented people and get them to actually spend their whole careers in the SEC or in some tech agency. And then we could not only have a credit bureau that I could trust and that's subject to some kind of, you know, public accountability, but we could also avoid this situation that Mark Zuckerberg described, where he said, look, we're the only ones who can provide election security. So tough luck. You got to do it all through us. We got to be in charge of all the elections. I mean, that's not a good solution. And the government could actually provide election security, not just in voting, but in monitoring what's done in digital platforms. But we'd have to commit to, the government has a job to do. We We got to give it the resources to do that job. And it's the way that Boeing just, eviscerated the FAA, was just deny it the resources that it needed to do its job. And then also get the Congress to pass a bill that said that the Boeing gets to say, by default, these are all the things where we're going to self-regulate, and then the FAA has to try and overturn the default where Boeing announces, oh yeah, we're going to self-regulate on MCAS. So,
well, turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
Sorry?
Turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
Yeah, right.
Do you see any of the candidates who are picking up on your ideas?
I've not tried to kind of connect with the campaigns, because part of the message is the job of economists is to provide the facts. And often the facts take the form of a menu. Do you want to have lower taxes, or do you want to have less inequality? And there's a range of choices. And where people want to align on that surface is going to depend on how much they value, say, the individual initiative and the absence of taxes versus how much they value equality. And there's no scientific answer about what's the right policy or the right trade-off to make. But if we can establish our credibility in that, we can actually just say, oh, actually, no, higher taxes do not lead to lower growth. There's no evidence to support that at all. And by the way, higher tax cuts do not ever pay for themselves. So let's just be clear about the facts. But if you're going to have less inequality, you're almost surely going to have to. You're going to copy countries that have less inequality. You're going to have higher taxes and make your choice. So I'm trying not to get pulled into the partisan fray, and really want to insist on this rigor about doing the scientific job well.
So, any questions? And wow, well, clearly you provoked a lot of debate.
Good.
A lot of debate.
Yep.
So let's start here and go around there. So since we do have a lot of hands
remember,
waving.
Reasonable people can differ, and I don't hear enough criticism and enough points where people tell me I'm wrong. So fire away.
But I say it'll be courteous but not compulsory to identify yourself, and keep your comments short because we do have a lot of hands.
So you asked me to identify myself or not identify?
No, it'll be courteous to identify yourself, but it's not compulsory.
My name is Ben Benson, Austin, Texas, and I have spent time looking at the literature on triple bottom line. And my question for you relates to that literature, which is, what is the measure of what you propose? My problem with looking through all the literature on triple bottom line is one of the measures, financial, is measurable. We can have goals. Yeah. The other two don't have goals, and they're not, and many times not measurable. And as a result, how do we know that we're actually achieving progress? If we're going to trade off from financial to something else, how do we calculate the ROI on that? How do we know what the measure is?
Yeah. Well, I agree that measurement is a very important part of this process. And I think that values are also an important part of the right solution. But it's hard to change values. And I think people who are just going, let's go the private, triple bottom line, corporate social responsibility route, are going that route because they've lost hope that we could have a government that could be a backstop on certain kinds of values. And the one I would start with, just very, explicitly and very consistently, is you can't lie. The bare minimum, you can't say things that are not true, and you can't say it by stringing together statements that are true, which have the effect of misleading. This is just not allowed. Furthermore, we're going to compel transparency about what you're doing, and then we'll see if you're misleading us, and then we'll see if we want to take a regulatory action or some kind of legislative action. But all along, we should have some measure in mind, an overall measure, like people should live longer, healthier lives. There shouldn't be large numbers of people who are just in despair, in pain, feel trapped. And when we propose something like, well, let's make it harder to enter into bankruptcy, we should measure, so how many people is this dooming to despair for the rest of their lives? And do we really want to take that measure just because the credit card companies would like it? So if we're clear about the measurements, clear about the things we're going to try, then we can look after the fact and say, well, we tried that. Did it do what we were hoping? If not, let's try something else.
Right, we got a question there. And then I'll go further back.
Hi, Arturo Brillenborg, University of Chicago economist.
Okay.
Well, this would be interesting.
I would
One of my former shipmates.
I would like to have your opinion on, we've understood that culture is very important for progress. Yeah. That is how ideas get created. And do you have any ideas on how to create positive cultures? Like, there are countries that have made it, other countries like my own country, Venezuela, did not make it.
Yep.
But before you answer that, just one thing. How does your ideas differentiate yourself from the long tradition of externalities in the economic tradition?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, to be explicit, and this is inside baseball, but I decided at a certain point in my career I was going to never use the word externality anymore, because I looked at how people were using it, and it's used in two very different ways. And there was even this attempt to create this the pecuniary and non-pecuniary externalities to lend some clarity to this area. And I just stopped using it because it was so unclear what it meant. So with ideas, the critical feature that is kind of related to externality is non-excludability. Can you control it? Can you keep somebody else from using it? You can use the law to protect them and so forth. But the more important thing is this concept of non-rivalry. If I know how to make up a mixture that saves a kid from dying from a diarrheal disease, this formula called oral rehydration therapy, if I know that, somebody else can know it, they can save their kid with that formula, I can save it. We're not rivals for using that formula.
How do you create good cultures?
Okay, well, in culture, I agree that culture is very important. And I think this is another, frankly, digression from the earlier conversation, but the essence, I think, of facilitating cultural change is to allow exit, and to facilitate exit. So I think the most important thing the rest of the world could do right now for Venezuela is say, okay, well, here's a place 20, 30 million people could come, they can work, they can be safe, they can stay as long as they want, if things get better, they can go back. But the world has no solution right now for 20, 30 million people who want to leave. And if you just look in Gallup, it's not just people in Venezuela. Hundreds of millions of people say they're making plans to leave this year, the country that they live in. So as a separate agenda, I think, well, let me link it back to what I was saying too. If we're serious about the ship is the nation. People are going to commit, okay, we as citizens, we're going to make sure everybody's progresses together, and we're all in it together. It's just not viable to say, well, we're going to treat the ship as everybody on Earth. So protecting the national ship is going to involve some kind of commitment to restrictions on immigration. And this is unfortunate, but I just think it's the reality we have to confront, especially when we're talking about 500 million people. So then once we recognize that, I think there's a moral imperative to say, we've got to come up with another solution to let people leave the places they're in. And if we do, there's an immediate humanitarian benefit. But in fact, the threat of exit and the possibilities of new places will be the force that drives cultural change.
Wow. Question back there, and then we'll come across.
Hi. My question's about the...
This is like the l'esprit de l'escalier, the thing I should have finished with, which is, by the way, if you wonder what the hell was he doing when he was talking about charter cities, that was actually about where could people go and let's get this dynamic of cultural change. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
My question's about the academy.
About
the academy.
Yeah.
So I run a program at the Aspen Institute that's called the Business and Society Program, and we work with your brethren in finance departments and business schools. Yeah. And one of the things we did after the market meltdown in 2010 was convene a group of finance faculty in a conference room across the way to find out, were they finding that there were new things they needed to be teaching? We had textbook writers there, et cetera. And I found that there was some enthusiasm, but they weren't quite ready. Yeah. And we're going to go back at it. And I'm curious, you made the statement that, take a number for, if you need to fire me. But are you also becoming a node for people in your part of the academy, finance as well as economics, who are seeking you out? And do you feel personally any responsibility to try to really shake up that domain of the academy?
The answer to the last question is yes, in the sense that I think it's a very important task, and I think I'm in a relatively good position to do it, so I can't shirk that task. To be honest, I don't actually like it. And the secret that probably most people don't know is I'm like a pleaser. I want everybody to like me, and so I don't actually like this belligerent kind of role, but I just think it is important enough. And also, to be very clear, right after I got the prize, I had to really take a pause and think about it, because there was a lot of pressure that saying, Paul, look, you're now the part of the heroic narrative. You're the hero scientist who did these great things, and you go out and tell people how great science is and how great you are, and that's your job now as a Nobel Prize winner. I had to think hard and long about whether that was my job. And this lecture was really one of the first times I've done this where I just start by saying, look, I was wrong. This is partly me rejecting that idea that I've got to pretend to be the hero. Because what I really have to do is just be a good scientist. Show what it means to be a good scientist. And part of that is admitting when you're wrong and admitting that the facts beat whatever your theory is. So this is a new dimension, and I'm looking for ways to try and attract or provide cover, frankly, for young people who'd like to address some of these concerns, but who are terrified that it'll destroy their career if they do so. And let me be clear that it's actually, I can't personally guarantee them promotion prospects, but there may be a way to build something, if you know the NBER, build something that's a little bit like the NBER, let them act together so that they feel like there's some community, and then there may be a way to do this. And finance is a very important area to do this in. Right. If you didn't connect with Anat Admati and Paul Fleiter, get them. But let me be clear. I wrote about, listen, here's the way to fix the financial market. We need regulation that's just like the FAA and the NTSB, and look how well that works in the airline and air travel area. So I take it personally that Boeing kind of just undercut the FAA, but I do want to try and, me alone, there's really very little I can accomplish in the time I have left. There's a few things I can write, but I do hope I can provide some cover for people who really do want to be a scientist. And it's a joyful career to pursue, and there's this clarity that comes from just sticking to the facts and using that as partly a check on ego. It's a really good way to live. So
I'm curious, when you wrote that memo to the World Bank economists, essentially saying nobody can make head or tail of what you're saying, right. You're writing all this economic stuff, it's completely impenetrable and totally pointless, which is kind of what you said.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, which is kind of unusual for, the chief economist to tell all the other economists in the World Bank, which is the temple of economists, that their work is kind of pointless. Mm-hmm. How did they react?
Yeah. Well...
And did you have any impact? Are any of these World Bank and IMF publications any less pointless now?
I should be clear about part of the background. As soon as I showed up there, I got a memo which was the most deceitful memo I've ever seen in my life from the people who reported to me. And it included kind of statements like, this is a change that will be budget neutral. You read all the way to the end and you add the numbers up and, we'll actually spend more, but it's actually budget neutral. So I was on the warpath and wanted to signal, you can't write something that's designed to deceive me. And so that was kind of the message I wanted to send. And beyond that, there was also some of this obfuscation and lack of clarity was, I just think, carelessness and a little bit of fear of taking risk, fear of making a prediction where you could be wrong. So my kind of, it was really just a gimmick to say, in scholarly writing, the frequency of the word and relative to other words is about 2.6%. So I said on the reports that I had to sign off on, I'm not going to sign off on the report if the frequency of and exceeds 2.6%. And it was kind of a gimmick, but it was a signal like, you got to start paying attention to what you write, and you got to be clear, and you got to take a stand. Do you know, the bank documents got up to like 5 to 7% ands. And it's funny, I wouldn't have anticipated this would be the problem, But so why do they have so many ands? It's like, well, we have to do this because it will help children not die. And it will help corporate social responsibility. And it will actually help financial empowerment. And it'll help women and. It was like just this endless kind of like, let's expand the tent. Let's get everybody involved somehow supporting my agenda. And it's like, come on. You're talking about oral rehydration therapy. This is about saving the lives of kids. Don't tell me about 17 other things. So now, did I have an impact? It's hard to tell. I think it's maybe too soon to tell. I think I got people's attention.
You certainly got people's attention.
But I also, I had 2 people who reported to me who lied. I moved one of them out, signaled I was going to move the next, and then the number 2 in the bank took me out of the management hierarchy. So I was a senior vice president with 0 reports because I couldn't just go in and move people just because they were lying to me.
Well, you paid the price then, but you did collect the prize.
And I stayed there for probably about 8 months after that, just trying to see, because everybody was saying, well, you just have to work the way the bank works, and you can still get your message. Just say it more gracefully, be it. And I was just wasting my time. So then I tried to quit. They said, you can't quit. It'll ruin the institution. Literally, it will destroy the institution if you quit, Paul. So I thought, okay, well, why don't I just go get this thing out in the Wall Street Journal that I think has got to come out at some point. And then they said, you broke the rules. We're going to have an investigation. I said, you don't have to have an investigation. I broke the rules. I'll tell you, I'll sign it, I admit. And so, okay, well, then you have to sign this MOU, and you have to go on leave, or we'll pay you while you're on leave, but this MOU commits you to give all of your messaging to us before you publish it. I'm not signing any MOU. And they said, okay, well, then you have to resign. I said, that's what I tried to do on Thursday. I resigned.
Well, as I say, did you get any congratulations from the World Bank for your Nobel Prize?
No.
Well, anyway.
That's okay.
Punchy, provocative, and honest.
Can I say why we got married?
Oh, yeah, okay, one last thing. Paul is very keen to tell you why he got married on the same day as his Nobel Prize.
I pulled off something that's very hard to do, which is a surprise wedding where your parents are there and they're all dressed up in a way that's appropriate for the wedding. So, everybody had the white tie and tails on to go to the medal ceremony.
You went to Sweden to collect your prize.
Yeah,
everyone thought they were going there to hear you speak economics.
Well, on the schedule,
you said, surprise, we're getting married too.
Well, on the schedule, it was like, that thing that says family photo? Actually, we're going to get married then. Right? We told them that morning and in the bus on the way to the church, and then it was great. I mean, no toasts, no gifts, no bachelorette party, no bachelor party. It was great. So.
Well, I think that's one experience that cannot be replicated easily.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Professor Romer, it's going to be around.
The question was,
so any questions or challenges or criticisms, he's keen to engage with you. And thank you very much indeed. In the lobby. Yes, thank you.